In the early hours of June 5, 2002, inside the Smart family home in Salt Lake City, 14-year-old Elizabeth Smart was asleep in the same room as her younger sister, Mary Catherine. In the middle of the night, Catherine woke up to the sound of footsteps in the room. She opened her eyes slightly and looked toward the noise. A strange man walked across the room. Then he went straight to Elizabeth's bed. Catherine saw him lean down close to her sister. In his hand was a knife. The man pressed the knife against Elizabeth's neck, then woke her up. Elizabeth opened her eyes. She saw the man standing in front of her, but she did not dare to scream. She could feel the blade pressed against her throat. The man led Elizabeth out of the room. Catherine stayed frozen in bed. She watched her sister being taken away, but she did not dare to call for help. Catherine could not see the man's face clearly, but she recognized his voice. She was sure she had heard that voice before. So who was the man who kidnapped a 14-year-old girl from her own bedroom? Did he know the Smart family? And why did he do it? To answer those questions, we have to go back to the hours before the kidnapping. Elizabeth Smart lived with her family in Salt Lake City, Utah. She was 14 years old, the second child in the Smart family. Her father was Ed Smart. Her mother was Lois Smart. The Smarts had 6 children and lived in Federal Heights, a quiet, wealthy neighborhood near the foot of the Wasatch Mountains. Elizabeth attended Bryant Middle School. At school, she was known for being disciplined, hardworking, and especially gifted in music. She played the harp. She practiced for hours every day until the instrument became more than just a hobby. It became one of the most important parts of her life. On June 4, 2002, the Smart family went to Bryant Middle School for an awards ceremony. That day, Elizabeth was being recognized for her academic and physical achievements. She was also scheduled to perform on the harp, but the family arrived late, and Elizabeth missed her chance to perform. After the ceremony ended, the family left the school and returned home. That night, everything seemed normal. Ed and Lois's children went to bed one by one. Elizabeth went back to the bedroom she shared with her younger sister, Mary Catherine. In the early hours of June 5, 2002, the entire Smart family was still asleep. Inside the bedroom shared by the 2 sisters, Catherine was woken by the sound of footsteps. It did not sound like someone in the family going to the bathroom. The steps were slower, more careful, and they were moving inside the girl's room. Catherine did not sit up. She stayed still in bed, pretending to be asleep, then opened her eyes just enough to look through the darkness. A man was in the room. He walked past Catherine's bed and moved toward Elizabeth. Catherine saw him lean down close to her sister. In his hand was a knife. The man pressed the knife to Elizabeth's neck and woke her up. He told Elizabeth he had a knife, that she must not make a sound, and that she had to get up and follow him. Elizabeth woke up completely under his control. She did not scream. She quietly got out of bed. Catherine stayed in bed. She watched her sister being led out of the room, but she did not dare to move. After Elizabeth and the man left the room, Catherine tried to gather the courage to run to her parents' bedroom, but before she could get out, she stopped. The man was still there. He was standing near the stairs, outside one of her siblings' rooms. Catherine quickly backed into the room. She was afraid that if he saw her, he might come back and take her too, or hurt Elizabeth right in front of her. She did not know exactly how long she waited, but the whole time, she did not dare to fall asleep again, and she did not dare to make a sound. Around 4 in the morning, Catherine finally felt it was safe enough to leave the room. She ran to her parents' bedroom and woke Ed and Lois Smart. Catherine told them that a man had taken Elizabeth. The man had a knife. At first, Ed and Lois thought their daughter had just had a nightmare, but when they checked the room, Elizabeth's bed was empty. Elizabeth was gone. The family began searching the house, but Elizabeth was not there. Then they found that the window screen had been cut with a knife. Ed and Lois immediately called 911, but one detail made Catherine's statement especially important. She said the man's voice sounded familiar. Catherine could not remember who he was, but she was sure she had heard that voice before. After the 911 call, police were sent to the Smart family home in Federal Heights. The bedroom where Elizabeth had been taken was examined first. Police saw that Elizabeth's bed was empty, and Mary Catherine was the only person who could describe what had happened that night. But she had not seen the man's face clearly because the room was too dark. She could only describe him as a man of average build, wearing light-colored clothing, around 30 to 40 years old. But as investigators looked closer, the scene did not fully match a normal break-in. There was a cut window screen, there was a chair outside, but there were no clear signs showing that the attacker had actually climbed in that way. The scene forced police to consider another possibility. The man may have known how to move through the house. He did not seem like a completely random intruder. He had gone straight to Elizabeth's bedroom, controlled her, and taken her out without waking almost anyone else in the family. For police, time was now the most important factor. In missing child cases, the first hours are always critical. If investigators do not find a lead quickly, the chance of finding the victim alive decreases with time. The search for Elizabeth Smart began that very morning. Police brought search dogs to the house. First, they had the dogs search inside to make sure Elizabeth had not been hidden somewhere in the home. When nothing was found inside, the dogs were taken outside. One dog picked up a scent and followed it through the neighborhood. The trail led police along streets near the Smart home, then stopped at a dead end. At that point, the trail disappeared. Investigators believed Elizabeth may have been put into a vehicle there, then driven away from the area. News of the kidnapping spread quickly. A 14-year-old girl had been taken from her bedroom in the middle of the night, in a neighborhood people believed was safe. Soon, people across Salt Lake City knew the name Elizabeth Smart. The Smart family also brought the case into the public eye very quickly. Ed Smart, Elizabeth's father, appeared on television and begged the person who had taken his daughter to let her come home. He spoke in front of the cameras almost broken by grief. For Ed and Lois, every passing hour made hope feel more fragile. After the family's public appeals, the community joined the search. Thousands of volunteers helped look for Elizabeth, and posters with her face appeared all across Salt Lake City. Police received a flood of tips, but in those first hours, none of them were strong enough to lead investigators to Elizabeth. No suspicious vehicle was clearly identified. No witness saw Elizabeth after she left the house, and the only person who had seen the kidnapper was Mary Catherine, a 9-year-old girl who remembered only a body shape, light-colored clothing, and a familiar voice. She said his voice sounded familiar. Catherine could not remember who he was, but she was sure she had heard that voice before. The first 24 hours passed, and Elizabeth Smart was still missing. The search continued, and the Smart family kept appearing in the media. Ed Smart stood in front of the cameras, begging the person who had taken his daughter to bring Elizabeth home. At first, the public stood with the Smart family, but after a short time, some people began paying attention to the way Ed Smart appeared on television. He cried in front of the cameras, but some viewers said they did not see tears. That detail started being repeated in the media and in public discussions. In many missing child cases, investigators have to examine the people closest to the victim. So, the Smart family also became part of the investigation. Police seized several computers from the Smart home for examination. Ed Smart was given a polygraph test. He passed. Elizabeth's uncle, Tom Smart, also drew attention because of strange behavior and unclear polygraph results. But later, police confirmed that he had an alibi and removed him as a suspect. Gradually, the suspicion surrounding the family no longer had enough support. Police had to shift to another direction. The new direction began with people who had been inside the Smart family home before Elizabeth disappeared. Before Elizabeth vanished, the Smart family had been doing repair work on the house. During that time, several workers and contractors had been inside the home. One of them was Richard Ricci. Ricci had worked for the Smart family. He had also had a dispute with Ed Smart over payment. When police checked Ricci's past, they found that he had a criminal record. He had been in and out of prison multiple times for theft, burglary, and armed robbery. To police, Ricci quickly became a major suspect. He had worked inside the Smart home. He had a conflict with Ed. He had a criminal past. And later, he was found with several items belonging to the Smart family. Police got a warrant to search Ricci's home. In a shed on his property, they found several items belonging to the Smart family, including jewelry that belonged to Lois Smart. Ricci admitted that he had stolen from the Smart family, but when he was asked about Elizabeth, he denied everything. Another detail made investigators even more suspicious: Ricci's Jeep. Around the time Elizabeth disappeared, the vehicle had traveled hundreds of miles that Ricci could not clearly explain. From those details, police began treating Ricci as their #1 suspect. The media also quickly started naming him as someone who may have been directly connected to Elizabeth's disappearance, but one person did not believe that: Mary Catherine. She was the only person who had seen the kidnapper in the bedroom that night, and no matter how many times police questioned her, Mary Catherine insisted that Richard Ricci was not the man she had seen. The case now had a contradiction that was hard to resolve. Every external clue seemed to pull police toward Richard Ricci, but the only witness to the kidnapping said they were looking at the wrong man. On July 24, 2002, nearly 2 months after Elizabeth Smart disappeared, another incident happened within her extended family. This time, it happened at the Wright family home. Jessica Wright, a 14-year-old girl, was in her bedroom. During the night, Jessica heard a strange noise outside her window. When she looked toward her desk, she saw a small object fall into the room and knock over a picture frame. Jessica immediately looked at the window. The window screen had been cut. The method was extremely similar to what had been found in the Elizabeth Smart case. Jessica screamed for her father. Her father, Stephen Wright, immediately ran into the room, but by the time he arrived, whoever had been outside was gone. The incident terrified the Wright family. But for police, it raised an even bigger problem. The method of entry was too similar to Elizabeth's case. If the two incidents were connected, then the theory against Richard Ricci began to fall apart. Because when the Wright home break-in happened, Richard Ricci was in jail. Then, on August 27, 2002, the case took another turn. That was the day Richard Ricci was scheduled to appear in court. But before the hearing could take place, Ricci suddenly collapsed in his jail cell. The cause was a spontaneous brain hemorrhage. He was taken into surgery for several hours, but after the operation, Richard Ricci did not survive. After Ricci's death, the regular updates between police and the Smart family became less frequent. New leads stopped appearing. The media also began shifting its attention to other stories. A case that had once gripped the entire country was slowly at risk of becoming cold. But Ed and Lois Smart did not stop. They kept appearing on television. They kept saying Elizabeth's name. They created a website and posted family photos and videos of her, hoping someone out there would see them, remember something, or come forward with a new lead. They believed their daughter might still be alive. And they were right. Let's go back to the early hours of June 5, 2002, to see what happened to Elizabeth right after she was taken from the house. At the time, Elizabeth was wearing only red silk pajamas. She had no shoes, no coat, and nothing to protect her body as she was forced across the rough terrain in the hills above Salt Lake City. The walk was about 4 miles. The destination was a crude camp hidden behind the hillside. When Elizabeth arrived, a woman dressed in white stepped out of the tent. The man called her by the name Hephzibah. The woman came toward Elizabeth and embraced her, as if this was a welcome that had been planned in advance. Then, Elizabeth was taken inside the tent. The woman washed her feet. The act felt less like simple care and more like a religious ritual. Next, Elizabeth was forced to change into white clothing, just like the woman's. Then the man performed a ritual he called a wedding ceremony. In that ceremony, he declared that Elizabeth was his wife. She would be one of 7 wives he believed God had given to him. After that ritual, Elizabeth was sexually assaulted. Later, Elizabeth said she lost consciousness during the attack. When she woke up, she found herself tied to a tree with a cable. The cable was only long enough for her to move within a very small area. The man stood in front of her and told her his name was Emmanuel David Isaiah. To understand why he built such a delusional world, we have to look at the real man behind the name Emmanuel David Isaiah. His real name was Brian David Mitchell. He was born on October 18, 1953, in Salt Lake City, Utah. He grew up in a family with 6 children, and his family also had ties to the LDS Church. From a young age, Brian showed many signs of instability. As he grew older, he dropped out of school, became addicted to alcohol and drugs, and slowly slipped away from a normal life. At 19, Brian left Utah and married a 16-year-old girl named Karen Miner. They had children together, but the marriage quickly fell apart. In his second marriage, to Debbie Mitchell, Brian began to show a clear pattern of control. He dictated how the family dressed, what they ate, and how they lived. At the same time, he became increasingly obsessed with religion. That second marriage eventually collapsed as well. On the very day his divorce from Debbie became final, Brian married his third wife. Her name was Wanda Barzee. Wanda also had children from a previous marriage. When Brian and Wanda came together, they slowly became a dangerous pair. Brian sank deeper and deeper into the extreme religious world he had created for himself. He believed he was receiving instructions directly from God. He began talking about visions. He saw himself as a special biblical figure. Later, Brian changed his name to Emmanuel David Isaiah. Wanda also took a new name, Hephzibah. The two left normal life behind and began living on the streets of Salt Lake City. They wore white robes. They begged for money. They preached. To many people passing by, Brian looked like nothing more than a strange, homeless man. But in Brian's mind, he was not a drifter. He believed he was chosen. He believed he had a mission. And he began writing those beliefs down in a 27-page manifesto. In that manifesto, Brian mixed religious language with his own distorted ideas. He wrote that he and Wanda would have multiple young wives. He believed those girls had been chosen for him by the will of God. Every day, Elizabeth lived under Brian and Wanda's control. He forced her to listen to the long manifesto he had written. He gave her a new name. He made her dress like him and Wanda. Day by day, Brian tried to make Elizabeth believe in the world he had created. About 6 days after the kidnapping, Elizabeth heard a voice calling from far away. Someone was calling her name in the woods. A search team may have come very close to the camp, but Brian immediately pulled Elizabeth into the tent and threatened her. He told her that if anyone came into the camp, he would kill them, and it would be her fault. Elizabeth had no choice but to stay silent. A short time later, the voice faded away. Her first chance to be rescued had passed. After that, Brian tightened his control over Elizabeth. During one conversation, Elizabeth mentioned her cousin, Olivia Wright. To Elizabeth, Olivia was simply a close friend her own age, but to Brian, she became a new target. He began to believe that Olivia Wright would be the next wife God had chosen for him. From then on, Brian began watching the Wright family. He observed the house, he studied their routines, and he waited for a chance to reach one of the girls in the family. On the night of July 24, 2002, Brian carried out the plan. He went to the Wright home. He approached a bedroom window. He cut the window screen, just as he had done in Elizabeth's case. But this time, the plan did not go the way he wanted. Jessica Wright heard the noise. She screamed for her father. Brian immediately ran away. After the failed break-in, Brian started to fear that the camp in the hills was no longer safe. But he did not take Elizabeth deeper into the wilderness. He did the opposite. He brought Elizabeth and Wanda down into the city. Brian and Wanda wore white clothing. Elizabeth was also forced to wear white like them. Her face was covered with a thick veil. One time, Brian, Wanda, and Elizabeth went to a public library. Their strange clothing caught someone's attention. That person called the police. An officer came to check on them. He asked the two women to remove their veils so he could see their faces. Brian refused. He said it was a religious matter. He said he was their father, and that according to their beliefs, outsiders were not allowed to see their faces. During all of this, Wanda sat beside Elizabeth. Under the table, she squeezed Elizabeth's leg hard. It was a silent warning. In the end, the officer did not have enough grounds to force them to remove the veils. He let them go. Another chance passed. After the incident at the library, Brian became even more cautious. He decided to leave Utah. Their next destination was California. In September 2002, the three of them arrived in the San Diego area. They set up camp in a dry creek bed near Lakeside. After that, they continued moving, continued begging, and continued living under the cover of wandering religious outsiders. In California, Brian targeted another young girl from a local Mormon family. He once tried to approach the girl's home, but backed away when he heard adults inside. Once again, his plan to take another victim failed. While Elizabeth was still under Brian and Wanda's control, back in Salt Lake City, one final important lead began to surface. That lead came from Mary Catherine, Elizabeth's younger sister. From the very beginning, Catherine had said that the man's voice in the bedroom sounded familiar, but she could not remember who it belonged to. On October 12, 2002, more than 4 months after the kidnapping, that memory finally came back. Catherine remembered a man who had once come to the Smart home to do odd jobs. He had been helped by the Smart family through their church community. He had done small jobs around the house, like raking leaves and other minor work. His name was Emmanuel. Ed Smart hired a sketch artist to recreate the face of the man the family had known as Emmanuel. He tried to remember every detail he could. On February 3, 2003, the Smart family released the sketch to the public. They asked anyone who recognized the man in the drawing to contact authorities. 2 weeks later, on February 15, 2003, America's Most Wanted aired a segment about Elizabeth Smart's disappearance. The sketch of Emmanuel appeared on national television, and this time, someone recognized him. Just one day after the broadcast, Brian David Mitchell's sister contacted police. She recognized the man in the sketch. It was her brother, Brian David Mitchell. Brian's stepchild confirmed the same thing. From that moment, police had his real name. They also had recent images of him, a bearded man in white clothing, living as a drifter and calling himself by a strange religious name. But at that point, Elizabeth was still with Brian and Wanda. She understood that Brian was being guided by the delusional world he had created, and Elizabeth began using that against him, looking for an opening. She told Brian that she felt God was calling them back to Utah. To an ordinary person, that might have sounded meaningless, but to Brian, it fit perfectly into the way he saw the world. He believed Elizabeth was beginning to understand his mission. He believed returning to Utah was a sign. On March 5, 2003, Brian, Wanda, and Elizabeth boarded a Greyhound bus back to Utah. After 9 months under his control, this was the first time Elizabeth felt she had influenced the direction of her own fate. 1 week later, on March 12, 2003, a couple was driving on State Street in Sandy, Utah. They saw 3 people walking along the road. A bearded man, 2 women with him. All 3 were dressed in white. The image was strange, but what caught the couple's attention even more was the man's face. They had seen that face on the news. They realized he might be connected to the Elizabeth Smart case. The couple immediately called Sandy police. Soon after, 4 officers were sent to the scene. When police approached the group, Brian tried to act normal. Elizabeth stood beside him and Wanda. Her face was still covered, but the officers noticed that the young girl seemed anxious. They decided to separate her from Brian and Wanda. Before police could ask many questions, the girl said her name was Augustine Marshall. That was the false identity Brian had drilled into her for months. But one officer did not believe the answer. He looked closely at the girl in front of him. Then he asked directly, "Are you Elizabeth Smart?" Elizabeth did not answer in a normal way. She said, "Thou sayest." It was a biblical-sounding phrase, meaning something close to, "You have said it." The officers understood what the answer meant. The girl standing in front of them was Elizabeth Smart. Brian David Mitchell and Wanda Barzee were arrested on the spot. Elizabeth was placed in a separate police car and taken to the station. On the way there, she could not stop crying. After 9 months, Elizabeth Smart had finally been found. But finding Elizabeth did not mean the case was over. Brian David Mitchell and Wanda Barzee entered the investigation and trial process, but the case dragged on for years because both were repeatedly evaluated for their competency to stand trial. In 2009, Wanda Barzee pleaded guilty and agreed to testify against Brian. Brian continued trying to delay the case by arguing that he was not competent to stand trial. But Elizabeth Smart testified, and prosecutors showed that Brian knew how to hide, how to manipulate, and how to use religion as a shield. On December 10, 2010, Brian David Mitchell was convicted of kidnapping Elizabeth Smart. On May 25, 2011, he was sentenced to 2 consecutive life terms in federal prison, with no possibility of parole. Brian David Mitchell would never be free again. Thanks for staying until the end of the video. If you enjoyed it, please leave a like and subscribe to the channel. I'll see you in the next video. See ya.